Will got another hot take for us before we get out of here. So we all agree Coop's freshman season is better than Zion Williamson's. You could take that one.
You want me to take it? All right. So, this is a fun conversation. It's a fun debate because I'm open to both sides. I think it's the most polished. He's way more polished than Zion. But then you turn on the Zion tape and the force of nature that dude played with. Like when he would punch the rim, like what Flagg did against Pitt was incredible, putting that dude through the rim. But when Zion was doing that I thought the goal was going to break every time in Cameron. And the lob that he was catching where his head was beside the square and his full hands were extended where it was at the top of the glass. Like, in dominant standpoint, I still lean Zion because he was so forceful. But polished, it's Cooper because he just does like I've done on my film breakdowns. Duke goes ISO 8 times a game. He's either going to score off that one-on-one or they're going to trap. He's going to throw a skip pass for a 3. And that's where he is better than Zion at that level of the game.
Yeah. I can't give it to him yet. I can't. He's getting there. He's getting there. I think a lot of it too will probably depend on his postseason performance as well. But Zion, man, I was watching the Virginia game today just because I wasn't working, so I was bored. But that man, 70% from the field, man. Like you just throw him the ball, it's a bucket. It's a bucket. Like defensively too, he was a monster. Like I know people will probably forget because of what he is now in the NBA, but Zion was switching on to point guards and clamping them.
Yeah,
one-on-one.
And his passes in transition were stupid. I mean, look, he arguably had the best game against UNC for a freshman ever for Duke. It probably actually was because that was the AC tournament, and that was a loaded I watched that game the other day. It's NBA talent versus NBA talent. Obviously, UNC's pros are at a different level than the Dukes, but you had Kobe White and you had Nas Little and all these dudes for UNC and Cam Johnson, and Zion has 31. And that's where it's like, look, Zion was crazy with the rock. And I just don't know where I'm at with you, to be honest.
It's tough. Because even like this first game back in that ACC tournament, what it was like 14 or 14, 13 or 14 or 14, 14? Yeah. Something like, this man was ridiculous. I can't give it a Cooper yet, but I will if his postseason is better. Because, I mean, Zion did have a good postseason, but his team let him down. So that ultimately what defines your legacy.
It obviously depends on how the postseason goes, obviously. But I think people are underrating Cooper's potential to just have a better season than Zion. Like, just because Zion had maybe like the best freshman season ever, right? Or something insane.
Yeah.
Cooper's right there. Like, I don't want to give it to him in case like something funky happens the last few games, but he's setting himself up for sure. And I've heard a number of people like Sam Vecini on the recent podcast was just saying that he thought Cooper at the end of the day was a better prospect than Zion because the floor he felt like was higher.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really strong take given that Zion is one of the 2 or 3 best freshman prospects of the last, or forget freshman, college prospects of the last 5 to 7, 10 years, right?
Yeah, like 10 years for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's very high praise. So I think he could be right there. I think Vecini, William Foster says Zion's highs are higher. I think Vecini said he thought that Zion's ceiling was higher at the time, but that his floor was also lower and acknowledgeable. Cooper's floor, he said, feels higher, and his ceiling probably is not far off of Zion's ceiling. And, that might be true. That might be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard for me because I think a lot of things factor into, and I'm not going to diminish what Cooper's been amazing. He's been elite. I think eventually it's probably going to be a 1A, 1B situation rather than who is better than the other. But I do think Cooper has a way better constructed roster with him, like and I think he does.
The space is
Yeah,
huge.
specifically the spacing. That's the biggest thing, because Zion was getting double teams, scoring through double teams. Virginia Tech was sitting in the paint, just leaving Trey Jones wide open. RJ Barrett, I actually like the RJ Barrett's numbers today. He shot 30% from deep. I didn't even realize that. He had some games where he went off from deep, but he was a bad shooter, at least from the outside. And obviously Cam Reddish, he was inconsistent every now and then. So, I mean, Zion still made, like, I think Carter wrote in the comments earlier, like, they beat Virginia twice. Their losses were to Gonzaga, like UNC obviously twice, but Zion didn't play. Like, they didn't lose even with their roster deficiencies, and that was because of him. So
Zion, I would say, is the more dominant player for sure, right? But yeah, we expected that Cam Reddish would be the spacer, and he wasn't, right? He still shot. Alex O'Connell. Dude, who was the Virginia guy today who was doing an AOC level like garbage time? He was putting his run in DD something.
I didn't even see.
My man put up like 16 points after it was like a 25-point game, and I was like, man, this is the O'Connell
special.
Yeah, the old AOC special. Shout out Alex O'Connell. He played pretty well when he was at Creighton. He made a good transfer and did well for himself.
Well,
I think
better. He was a fifth year.
He was. Didn't he end up making like a G League All-Star team or something? Like he did. I don't know. I think I feel like something happened. I forget the story there, but But yeah, Cooper, just the fact that so much of his stuff comes facing the basket and like he can score in such a wide variety of ways, whereas Zion, I know, like he made a few threes, but it was mostly just absolute crushing dominance inside. I think that says a lot, man. That's so hard to do.
It's hard to do, and also like the ACC was obviously way superior then than it is now, to where it's like, well, it'd be cool to see Cooper Flagg play against those Florida State teams, that UNC team, to see. But in terms of numbers, Cooper obviously has done a hell of a job. But Zion, man, he was just so dominant. And looking back, like you said, RJ shot 30% from three. That team just could not shoot well consistently, and that was ultimately, obviously, their downfall. Was like when you had to put AOC out there to get threes, and that was just not really the type you wanted to do. And I wish Reddish was, better, but he was streaky. But they'll always have that Louisville comeback too, which was
like they had stretches. I mean, the clip I posted today, they did not miss threes that game, but it just wasn't the best constructed roster. But one guy in here someone said something about Marvin Bagley. People forget about Marvin Bagley. Oh, someone said, is Coop better than Marvin Bagley? Yes, I think he's past Marvin Bagley a long time ago. I think Bagley was dope. One of my favorite players. I think obviously people forgot about him immediately because the next year was Williamson.
Correct. Yeah, he went from dominant to one of the most underrated one and dones at Duke. And that's no disrespect to him. It's just Zion followed him, and then you got Ben Caro a couple years later, and then it's like, oh, you remember Marvin Bagley?
Yeah.
I feel like it's worth noting that Bagley
didn't play defense. I know you're about to say
he was a one side of the ball player. He was a one side of the ball player.
Correct.
Like, we had to play. We were an all zone team the back half of that season. Like when we made that switch, we basically played nothing but zone. Right? Like, and you knew it, and that for Duke, that's a big trigger to pull. You know what I mean? Like, that's ridiculous, but that's what we had to do that year. And I do think that Marvin played a role in that. But offensively, Marvin was unbelievable. He was incredible.
Yeah, he was the quickest second jumper I've ever seen. And then Zion took it away from him the following year, because I was like, I've never seen a dude miss a layup and then dunk it immediately after, and then Zion did it right after he did.
Yeah,
Marvin did have that thing where, because his arms were like pretty long, because he looked long, when he did the second jump, like Zion obviously got a lot of elevation, but Zion just looked like a freak. You know what I mean? Like, like it was just crazy watching him play. Marvin, when he would jump up, you could tell how high he was because he had like the ranginess in terms of his body, you know what I mean? So like when Zion, they'd have to freeze frame it and you'd be like, how can a guy like that have his eyeballs like above the rim? But when Marvin was jumping, you could tell how high he was. Like you could, and on a second leap, like it was crazy. If you told me that Marvin's pure vertical second jump was as high as Zion's, I mean, I don't know that I'd be like stunned. The second leap was incredible from him. I think you're right to call that out.
Yeah, it was definitely a sight to see. Paolo not above Bagley. Stop it. Speaking about, we
Final Four.
Yeah.
Final four is big. Although Bagley won Player of the Year in the ACC, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I don't think Paolo did.
Did he? Did Bagley win it?
I think Bagley did, dude.
I think he did.
I think Bagley was first team. He might have been first team All-American also.
Yeah, he was definitely first team All-America.
Well, then he had to have been the ACC. But who else would have been the ACC Player of the Year that year?
Let me see.
Am I tripping? I could be completely wrong, but I thought he won ACC Player of the Year.
It feels like he had to have.
I think his accolades were higher than Paolo's, but Paolo won. Paolo made the Final Four, obviously, but then the Final Four was just such a game that nobody wants to remember. That I think people underestimate how hard it is to get to the Final Four, and furthermore, how incredibly Paolo played in the tournament. Like, go back and look at Paolo's numbers in the tournament.
He killed it, but
God tier level tournament performance. I bet in terms of one and done performance in the NCAA tournament, he's got to be one of the best we've ever had. If not right at the very top of the list. He was incredible.
Clutch. He was so clutch.
I will say though, Jack makes a good point. Marvin Bagley was 1 point from the Final Four. Probably should have got the ball at the end of the game to send them to the Final Four if Grayson's shot fell off the rim. So I don't want to, fully say, just because Paolo got to the Final Four, his season was better,
Counterpoint, the fact that Grayson was taking shots at the end of the game and Paolo was the guy shooting at the end of the game, I think says a little something about their respective roles. You know what I mean?
Yes and no, but Grayson is a Nazareth chick. Like Grayson was Grayson. Like Paolo didn't have a Grayson equivalent. Like Wendell Moore wasn't that.
But Grayson facing the basket could break down and from the outside and get inside. Like Marvin was not that guy. Paolo was that guy, right? Marvin wasn't really that guy, which I think we saw especially in the final years of K, we saw a lot of those like bigger players, but who weren't guys you just give the ball to outside and let them cook. They wouldn't get the ball at the end, but Paolo was one of those guys. I mean, I feel like that is not merely a seniority thing and is also just how K tended to run his offense at the end of the day.
Jack did say RJ shot the ball over Zion. Russ, come on.
Because RJ was the guy who you'd give the ball to outside, and Zion wasn't really that guy.
No, I'm not rocking with that one. Zion.
No, I'm not saying, dude. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was the right call, but I'm saying that that's what we chose to do routinely. Like that is true.
Yeah.
I will say though, the one time that Zion did take it was the game winner against UNC in the ACC tournament. ISO, and granted, he threw it up off the backboard and then tipped it in because that's the most Duke game winning play you could have is an ISO for your best guy. Just throw it at the rim and just do a quick putback, and that's what happened. But won the game.
Hey, what a game!
You would have thought that went well enough that would have been the go-to play throughout the season, but
the tournament
it was not the case.
No.
Oh man, but we that does remind me we will have to do that podcast at the end of the year, ranking all the top one and dones because that is a fun discussion.